Dr. Jenny Hoffman, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you shared a fun napkin, and in our intro, I talk about how curious I get about people's stories. So your napkin really aligns. Your message really aligns with that. It says, "Open up, be vulnerable enough to lead with curiosity, empathy, and connection." Why did you share that with me?
I shared that with you because I had a personal experience with a health crisis and it caused me to lead my life differently. And I realized when I started leading my life differently that it was very rewarding and I had amazing results. So I wanted to share that with you and your listeners.
Okay, so um, personal health crisis. That sounds ominous. What happened?
I was expecting my first child, my daughter, and when I went to give birth, first I should say, trigger warning if anyone's listening, and this is triggering for them. I had a long but uncomplicated labor. I was low risk. I'm the person who does all the preparation, so I had, done all the prenatal classes and done everything I could to prepare. And yet, right after my daughter was born, I started having severe pain. And it was far worse than labor pain. I was telling the doctors like 10 times worse. And yet, there was no clear problem. And so I was told, like, don't worry about it. You should be okay. And the pain just kept getting worse and worse. And it turns out that I was experiencing postpartum hemorrhage. And I lost 2.2 liters of blood and needed an emergency procedure right then. So we couldn't make it to an operating room or anything. So I had no anesthesia. And then also had to have a follow up surgery 10 weeks later, had to have physical therapy for 2 years, did talk therapy to try to get over the PTSD that I experienced from the situation, and realized that that nearly cost me my life.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why your story, and it's going to make me emotional, one of the reasons why your story hit me when I heard about it was that happened to my wife. Um, on our second child, um, perfectly normal first labor and delivery, and she had a situation where she was hemorrhaging. No one knew it. And if she didn't get up to take care of our daughter, no one would have realized it. And I was completely unaware of the situation because she sent me home. And again, if she hadn't sent me home, we don't know what would have happened because I would have taken care of our daughter when she was crying. So she got up to take care of her, and that's when she discovered that she was having a hemorrhaging problem. So this is a real thing. I mean, this is this is horrible, and I can't even imagine how you were feeling. I only know the other side of it. I know how I was feeling in that situation. So 2.2 liters of blood, that's a lot of blood. For context for people listening, again, this is this is life and death.
Half
This
a
is how
woman's normal blood volume.
That's right. That's half of your blood volume, and
Yes.
much less than that, there's almost no coming back from it. Even though it's half, like once you get below that 50% level, it's perilous. It's very difficult. So you are on the line, which is incredible.
And thank
And
you for sharing your story as well, because I had no idea that you had direct personal experience with this. And you're right, this is real. This happens. Postpartum hemorrhage is the leading cause of maternal mortality.
yeah, and I think that when we think about that, we hear about how in the old days, right? People say in the old days, uh, this is women, mothers died in childbirth, and it was a statistic, but it's incredible to be confronted with it. So you obviously had this incredible, unbelievable experience, and w- how long did it take you to recover following all the therapy, physical and psychological, mental, to come into yourself?
Fully recover, was probably 2 years.
Right.
I was certainly for months, I was not physically recovered at all. At the end of a year, I could see myself more, that I live with passion and energy, so I was coming back to life and I could see that. My friends and family could see that. But it was a couple years really, which felt
Yeah.
like a very long time.
And how did that impact your early years with your daughter?
What an interesting question. It's something that obviously you can see in my reaction still impacts me because I wasn't able to lift her because I wasn't strong enough, and the doctors were concerned about further hemorrhaging, and so I couldn't lift her for weeks to a couple months, and I felt like that impacted my bond with her from the very beginning. And I do feel like she's 9 now, so I think we have a very close bond now. But it definitely limited the way I could interact with her and how I could interact with her. And luckily, my family was supportive, my friends were supportive, so they were helping me lift her. And so I could still spend time with her. But it definitely impacted that bond. And the other way it impacted me is that every year on her birthday, which I intend to make a celebration for her and of her, it was a triggering event for me. So I ended up having to do quite a bit to prepare for her birthday every year. And so I learned to take the day off work and practice self care and surround myself with close family and maybe one or two friends who could help me celebrate my life as well as celebrate her birthday.
That's beautiful. I love that you had all that support because I think one of the narratives, at least watching Stacy experience it at that time, one of the narratives were even with her first child. She had a very long labor the first time, and I remember her sitting there or lying there, saying like, "What's wrong with me? Everybody else had no problems. Everybody else so there was this narrative running in her mind against herself the entire time. And then when she got out of it, she was told by her friends, "Well, we just didn't want to tell you the truth. And we didn't want to tell you how hard it is and how bad it is." And she was like, "Well, the whole time I thought there was something wrong with me because no one spoke about it." And then with our second child, when this happened, it sort of the whole thing, the whole narrative came back up again. Was that something that played a role for you in your early years as well?
Definitely. That is part of the reason that I wrote to you, Open Up, because I felt like we need to share these stories. So my first labor was 24 hours. I went on to have a second child, so that's the positive news about this, and we can talk about that
That's
too.
a
But
that's
that,
a that's a miracle considering what was going on, right? I mean,
yes,
it's a miracle. We had a third as well, and miraculous. It's amazing.
exactly. That one was 18 hours, so I was grateful to have 6 hours less. But yes, both of those felt very long. And I don't have sisters. I'm an only child myself, and so I suppose I didn't have people who had opened up to me about what the experience was really like. And after my experience, and because I was still struggling with my health, I had always been taught as a leader in work to not be as vulnerable and share as much information. And so it was in opening up that I realized how much it benefited others to actually hear what what labor is really like and what complications can happen, not to scare them in any way, but just so that you're educated and knowledgeable, and then you can also prepare. And that was the turning point, the difference for me.
So I don't want to get too gendered about this, but is there a different story that you think you were told as a female leader in a global firm? I mean, you ascended to be brand manager for a brand that everybody in the world knows. Like everybody knows what Gore-Tex is, right? So you reached a pinnacle of leadership in a multinational organization. Um, and is there a is there was there something else that you, a second narrative that you may have been fighting in the work environment that said, hey, no, you need to show up not emotional, not sensitive, not open, not empathetic. You need to be a boss. And a boss is this directive kind of person. Is that something else that you had to encounter or learn and then unlearn?
It was definitely a narrative I fought. We could ask, where did that narrative come from? Some of it, I think, is the society, the overall culture in which we live in. Some of it, I don't think the company or organization necessarily told me that, but that was the narrative that I heard and that I felt, to the point where there was even a time when a boss of mine said, be more like a man. And I realized that he did that with good intention. And the intent was to tell me to be more assertive. And I realized that women as leaders get stuck in a catch 22 where we're told to be more assertive, but then we also expect women to not be as assertive. And so that's the catch. And I realized that I had to just show up as me and what was
Right.
my style. And I could be most effective as me, not trying to be somebody else.
Yeah. So, and I think it's really, there are two sides of that, right? There's no puppet master pulling strings saying, oh no, we're going to tell everybody to walk and talk this way. And so there's some good intention behind some of the overt, like be more like a man, the advice that you got, but also the covert, the codification of what leadership ought to have looked like. And and I think what's really neat now is there's more of an acceptance for people becoming who they really are and being that person in leadership, as opposed to being somebody else and then trying to put on a different hat to be a leader, right? But being yourself in leadership is really something that is encouraged more and more, isn't it?
I believe that it is. And I also think it's why it's the exact right time to have this conversation and be talking about opening up, because we've got to shed those outdated beliefs.
Right, right. How did you, so you've used your own experience, right? Coming through this obviously incredible, impactful is not the right word, because it's this it impacts every part of your life. And you start to develop this idea that no, in fact, closing my mind or closing this part of my life off from everybody else as a leader is not the right way to do it. Opening up is the right way to do it. Let's talk
Exactly.
about the experimentation of that, because I'm sure it wasn't like a eureka moment where you just came in and were changed. It probably evolved. Am I wrong?
That's true. It evolved. The first time that I really remember it, it's still stuck in my mind, is I was waiting for a meeting to start with a former boss of mine. We had worked together for over 7 years, so we knew each other well. And he hadn't seen me since I had returned from maternity leave. And he asked
First
me,
time or the second time?
this is the first time.
The first time, okay.
And he asked me how the baby and I were doing. And I said, actually, it's quite a story. It didn't go well. And when I told him, first, he was vulnerable enough to show some emotion. But his question for me was, what did I learn? And I'm somebody who typically responds very quickly and thinks very quickly. And yet it took me a minute to think about, oh, what did I learn from that? Because I was still stuck in a moment of like, why did this happen to me?
Right.
And so that changed my perspective, took me out of that suffering enough that I could say, I learned I was stronger than I knew. I didn't know I could survive something like that. And I learned that I could trust my intuition. I knew something was wrong and I was right, and I advocated for myself. And I learned to live with less fear. Because if I could survive something like that, then whatever resistance was happening at work or whatever challenge there was, I could likely overcome.
Yeah,
And
that's not the same as losing 2.2 liters of blood.
that's
You
right.
got this. You got
That's
this.
exactly right. I've got anything else. And so it caused me to then realize that when other challenges, because life is full of challenges, resistance, moments of incredible difficulty. So in those times, I could ask myself, what did I learn? And become really curious about the resistance and the challenge instead of getting stuck in it.
Have you maintained a relationship with this former boss?
I have, yes.
Yeah, I would be surprised if you didn't, because anybody who showed up that way in that moment is got to be a pretty extraordinary person, uh, especially to come up with what you learned. Because really, what they were doing in that moment was helping you make the shift from why did this happen to me to why did this happen for me? What can I take
Yes.
from this? Like, what? How am I at the cause of this? And that's a really powerful thing to do as a leader, right?
It's probably the most powerful thing you can do as a leader because being a leader is really about helping those around you achieve their purpose. And that's what he enabled me to do.
That's so great. Helping others around you to achieve their purpose. So you answered that I learned I was stronger than I am. I learned to trust my intuition, and you lived with less fear. Those are powerful outcomes from one conversation that you've, remembered for many years later. And obviously, it's informing this napkin that we've created, or that you've shared with me, or that you've created. And let's talk about the evolution. So, when you observed those learnings, what changed from you? Like, obviously, you applied some of them more consciously afterward, didn't you?
Absolutely. I love asking questions. And so the curiosity, maybe I'm also an engineer, so maybe the curiosity was somewhat built in, but I made it much more intentional, especially as a leader in the face of challenge. So if I was trying to influence a decision, I feel like we're often taught to just share our point of view or share our perspective. And that doesn't always work. And I would get frustrated if that didn't work. And instead, I switched that and started asking questions. So apply the curiosity. What matters to the other person? Why are they resisting? What would they care about? And that was really critical to helping me overcome challenges and then be able to achieve things that I didn't think were possible.
Yeah, and I think that's really powerful, right? So you're right. When the pressure's on, it's like ready, fire, aim. It's not. There's no what are we shooting at? Nobody's talking about that, but that's an important question. Like, why are we shooting? What are we shooting at? What's going on? Why is this urgent? There's a lot of questions we can be asking. So, what's one way you said you became intentional in the face of challenge? This is really important stuff. And I think a lot of leaders, there's somewhere out there, there's a leader listening right now, and he's saying, oh my gosh, I just need to react. I don't have time to get all of the information. And you used intentionality to get to a place of curiosity. Let's talk about how you develop that muscle. I'm sure it's much more habitual now, but moving from that reaction mode to a curious mode can be challenging for some, right?
Absolutely. It was challenging for me. And honestly, what I'd say in opening up and being vulnerable here, it is still challenging for me. I still got feedback even 2 weeks ago to slow down and take a pause. So it is an ongoing life lesson and learning.
So how do you do it? What's the first step in getting that intentionality into to move from reaction to curiosity?
I think the first step was realizing that that's what I wanted to do. So deciding that I wanted to be intentional there. And that was actually realizing exactly the concern that you had with the time, that it would take more time or I don't have time to be curious and stop and ask questions. The first place I experienced this was I did R&D portfolio management. So of all the money that a company is going to invest in new products, where should it go? And the conversation with the decision makers would typically be about, I want this project and I want that one, and here's why. And it was just like you said, what if you stop and say, well, what are we trying to achieve overall? And what will our criteria be? And ask those questions from the very beginning, and then you can start talking about specific projects. But people rarely want to take the time to ask those questions and be curious first. But you start to realize that if you're not curious and you don't ask those questions first, it actually takes longer because you then will, there'll be different points of view and it'll be difficult to overcome them. And how do you get everyone to support a particular decision? So it was realizing that in not getting curious, I was going to either not achieve the results I wanted or it was going to take longer.
Yeah, I love that. And really, there's a lot of leadership punditry that says the greatest leaders are the best listeners, but
Yes.
you can't be a good listener if you're not curious. You just can't. You have to be curious. So you want to be a better listener? Get genuinely curious about what somebody else is thinking, what their perspective is, what the world looks like from their way, from their side of the table, and things change pretty quickly. But the next step after curiosity is empathy, because being curious and listening to them but not giving a dang doesn't really matter much, right?
You got it exactly. It's great to be curious, but then you have to show the empathy. And this actually started for me in sharing my story of postpartum hemorrhage. And I started sharing it because I was having the health challenges and sometimes I get triggered at work. And so I wanted people to understand why I might react in a certain way at work. And this actually happened because on the year anniversary of the postpartum hemorrhage, I was at work that day and it was a particularly challenging day. And my mentor, who is an amazing person, I broke down to him really. And luckily, he took it in a very respectful way, a very professional way. And I also learned to always take my daughter's birthday off in the future, that it wasn't worth it to be at work then. But it really caused me to start sharing my story so people knew why I was reacting, why I was struggling. Because basically, if I felt like I wasn't heard, then it would trigger that it felt like a life and death situation. It triggered that PTSD. And even if it was nothing to do with a life and death situation, it was just a decision we were making at work, and I wanted my perspective to be more heard. And so I needed people around me to know that. And so I started sharing what I was doing. And I realized that other women, just like you shared with your story, other women started saying, you know what, I experienced complications as well. And I had a difficult time here as well. And that's where the empathy started because it was something that I could relate to and understand how difficult it was. And they started sharing what their experience was like. So that was the heart of the empathy to me, but it really opened my heart. And and then it led to this third piece, which is connection, because the connection was then where the magic happened. But to me, the empathy then gave me the inspiration that through the difficult times, I knew why I was continuing through.
Yeah. Um, I can't even. Yeah. There's so much there, and it's so powerful here that you're taking this thing that you experienced the hardest of ways and have turned this into a framework to share with others. And I really do believe that we are our best for the world when we give to others what we needed most ourselves. And you really needed these tools for you, and you were gifted them. You were lucky and to be supported in some really beautiful ways at critical times, and it noticed what that did for you and have made that part of your intentional practice. It's incredible how you've done that, and it's an incredible gift that you're paying forward. And I wonder if you've noticed that.
I really appreciate you saying that. My first thought was it didn't feel like a gift at the time since growth often feels painful. So I want to acknowledge that the discomfort that you have to go through in applying curiosity, empathy, and connection. And I would say that I realized about the paying it forward very early on in my life. I'm actually one of the first in vitro fertilization babies in the United States. And I went into health technologies because people made it possible for me to be here. So I went and got a PhD in bioengineering because I wanted to pay it forward. I wanted to have a similar impact on healthcare innovation just like people made it possible for me to be here. So I had that intentionality. I'm a very reflective person, and I had some of that intentionality earlier, but it was magnified through my own experience.
You're pretty understated. Like I had some of that intentionality, but I went and got a PhD to pay for it. Like that. It's a little unaligned in terms of the magnitude of the intentionality, but that's beautiful. So
Thank you.
okay, so let's take the curiosity, empathy, and you said connection.
Yes.
W- What does that look like? What is that part?
The connection is all about the community of people around you. Connection is where you apply what you learned in the curiosity and the opening of your heart that you got in the empathy to bond with people. And this connection is so critical for a couple reasons. The first reason is that when you're overcoming a challenge, there are times when you just don't have enough strength yourself to keep going. There were moments when I could not get out of bed and keep going. And it was literally and figuratively leaning on somebody else that kept me going. That's in the physical health recovery crisis, but it's the same as a leader at work. There are times when it just feels like nothing is going your way, nothing's going right. Even the external world can be changing, and there's just so many headwinds that you wonder if you should keep going, keep fighting as a leader. And so it's relying on the community around me that kept me going at times. That connection also, though, is critical because there were times when I had an idea for developing a new medical device, and there wasn't enough people and funds to support it. And I was able to use my curiosity and empathy to create connection with other people who volunteered to give their extra time, their extra strengths to get a project going. And so that connection created an inspiration and a determination that wouldn't have otherwise been there.
Yeah, there's a recent conversation I had with a great friend who's also a doctor, a PhD, Dr. Malik Muhammad. And Malik shares connection plus challenge equals change. And really, change is the wrong word. He likes transformation there, but it doesn't have a nice alliteration. So he replaced transformation with change. So, but his idea is that truly connection is the capital that we require to challenge people, to challenge norms, to challenge something and create transformation in the world. And it sounds like you're saying something very similar. And the idea that once you've been curious, once you've created opened your heart, then building the community is absolutely essential, and not just for the leader to execute, but also to the leader to get support through those
Exactly.
difficult times.
Yes, and he said it very well, and I would agree with what you repeated there, that it's also about, we often think about creating a team to support the leader's vision. But what if it's not only about supporting the leader? I mean, the leader would have a vision, but it's also about supporting everyone's growth and being thinking about that growth of the community as a priority.
Yeah, that's an ecosystem of growth as
Exactly.
opposed to just a well-oiled machine that's designed to deliver an outcome, which is this, sort of manufacturing line uh, idea that is definitely outdated. And I think it goes back really neatly to your earlier comment about what a leader is there to do. It's to help other people to live their purpose, to grow their purpose. All of that is pretty closely tied together, isn't it?
Absolutely. You can see that I'm a purpose driven person and leader. And I see that that's the definition of leadership for me.
That's amazing. So talk about again, you ascended to some pretty, people would from the outside looking in, and maybe even yourself, you would say, "Hey, I was doing pretty well. I was pretty successful in my career at leading the Gore-Tex brand globally. That's pretty big. I've got some Gore-Tex around the house, so everybody would agree. But at the same time, you've really accelerated from that time to something that's much greater for you afterward, right? Like things have really changed once you've adopted this philosophy. Isn't that true?
Yes, absolutely. So first, within the corporate environment, things changed for me, and I felt like I was able to accomplish even more. So that was amazing. That allowed some of that acceleration in my career. But also, it helped me realize that I had this idea of the type of role that I would want in my career. And it was exactly those that you mentioned. And then when I got there, I realized that's not the peak of the mountain. There's more to my life. There's more to my career as well. And so I ended up going back into the startup world and wanted to work specifically in areas of passion for me. So I wanted to go back and work in women's health because of my experience. And I knew how much innovation and investment is needed in improving women's health. So I have worked both in women's health technologies to address some of the experience that I've had as well as others, and also have created a collection of stories of other maternal complications, so stories like my own. And I realized so much of the data in maternal complications was really around maternal mortality. So when people don't survive, and yet we have this wealth of women who do survive, and there's so much we could learn from them. So I recently got 103 stories of maternal complications. And of course, I'm an engineer with a PhD. So I analyzed all of the data, looked for trends about where there's opportunity to improve the situation for
I'm sure
women.
there's more than one quadratic equation involved.
That's right.
I think that's, again, it gave me sort of goosebumps when you talked about it, but you're right. The focus is on mortality, and a lot of healthcare is about avoiding death as opposed to promoting life.
Yes.
And what if we picked up the clues around the women and the stories and the data that supports those stories of survival and thriving, and we're able to de-risk for those instead, right? What a brilliant idea. And that's what it sounds like you're working on.
That's it exactly. Because I realized that the impact, at least in my situation, let's take me as the example, the impact to the health crisis was really underestimated based on our traditional calculation of impact. So, for example, the CDC did a study of maternal complications. My case wasn't even included in that because you had to have at least 4 blood transfusions to be included, and I only had 3. Well, I think that that's a severe underestimation then of the impact of maternal morbidity, and morbidity being complications due to an unforeseen outcome that have, a quality of life impact. And so that's where I saw that the only place to get the true impact and the true incidence, so the true rate of these complications happening, is to go to the survivors themselves.
Amazing. Um, and it's so true that we've sort of got this, backwards, right? Because when someone hears 4 transfusions, that sounds like that's a lot. If
Yes.
someone heard 2 transfusions, that's still a lot. Like, most people in their entire lives don't even get one.
If you need
So
any transfusion, something has not gone according to plan, and we should look at how we don't need transfusions in the future.
right. So this is a big deal. Um, so your work has accelerated you in purpose's direction, and and what has that done? It's great to talk about your career, but what has that done for you, Jenny? Like, how has this promoted your own growth and healing through all of this?
First, in terms of healing, the fact that we can talk about my experience and I'm able to talk about it, without getting upset or being triggered in any way, that shows healing right there. So for anyone who's been through a difficult situation, acknowledge the celebrate the small steps, the celebrate the success, because that is progress right there. The second thing I'd say is people around me just realized how they comment about how much I just live with so much meaning, so much life. I come with this passion, I show up with energy, and that is very meaningful for people. And that to me is acknowledgement of the healing and the realization of I found my purpose and I'm living my purpose. And I truly believe that everyone can do that. And it's so critical for leaders to show up as their whole selves and open up.
Yeah, without getting too woohoo about this, it's almost like two people were born on that day, right? You were reborn into something much greater at the same time that you gave birth to your daughter, and I think that's it's beautiful. It's powerful, and that's the thing that I'm sitting with. It's such a gift, and it's so amazing that you're willing to share that with the world.
I hadn't thought of it that way. And obviously, I'm having a reaction right now thinking of it that way. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it was the first thing that came to me as you shared your short story. This is this is a very emotional podcast for me and for you, and I want to thank you for sharing that so openly with me and sharing the space with me. It's a beautiful container for this conversation. So I'm going to appreciate you for being. It's one thing to write, be vulnerable enough. It's another thing to sit here and cry with a total stranger on across Zoom, Riverside, or whatever tool we're using. So that's number one. Number two, this is the part of the conversation where we express gratitude. So I wanted to appreciate you first. It comes from a napkin that a dear friend, John Rulin, shared with us 11 years ago. What you appreciate appreciates. And his idea was that when you appreciate people for who they are, they appreciate and value not just for themselves, but for the community and the world around them. It sounds very aligned with what your work is all about. He started a movement around it, and he suddenly passed away, unfortunately, last year. And in honor of him, we are paying forward his message, and we're asking every guest to appreciate somebody. Is there someone you'd like to shout out and appreciate today?
What a great plan to do a shout out. So thank you for asking. First thing I would say is I could only be here for many people. So there's actually a long list of shout outs that I could do. But today I'm going to shout out Farah because Farah connected with me after she shared her own health crisis. And then she helped me with collecting the stories and figuring out how to analyze them in maternal morbidity. And I couldn't have done it without her. Of course, that shout out is also knowing that there are many other people who have had an impact on my life.
That's beautiful. Thank you for joining me, Jenny.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.